Hello my creative friends, it's time to take another art break and we're going to continue with the Woodland Animals with Red Glasses series. Last week we met Mr. Bramble Bristol and this week we're meeting Miss Rubi's red squirrel. That's Ruby with an I. Now Miss Rubi loves to scurry around the woodland searching for the largest strawberries as well as something to decorate her nest with. If she can find some acorns or even something shiny, it's sure to come home with her. At the beginning of this video, I'm going to break down the steps of how you can draw a little red squirrel with some simple shapes, but if you would like a simple trace and paint option where you could just trace it and paint right along with me, I do have a sketchbook membership. That's where I have all of the line drawings for any of the paintings I do on my channel. You can just simply scan that QR code, it'll take you right over there. The membership is very reasonably priced. I so appreciate all those who support my channel that way. Thank you so much for doing so. Well, let's grab your paint and bring Miss Rubi Redtail to life. Ruby with an I.
For Miss Rubi, we're going to start with the head, and I'm just making a soft little curve. Now, Miss Rubi is facing slightly sideways, so that next line I made off to the right-hand side is the back of her head. And then I'm coming off to the top here. I'm going to come down, but I'm going to do just a little gentle line that comes out just a little bit to create a cheek line. Now, since she's facing sideways, I always like to add just a little bit of an arched line on her face. That's going to line up where I'm going to put her nose, her mouth, and her eyes, and how I'm going to build her face. So I want it to face sideways. I'm going to put the little nose there on the line, do a little swoop smile face type of smile, and she's got two little teeth that are showing in the front. Now for Miss Rubi's ears, I'm going to come up. She's a red squirrel, so she has pointed ears. I'm going to come up with that little point, but I'm going to blend it back to the back side of her head. That's going to make that ear look like it's in the front. The other ear goes behind, so I'm going to leave that forehead area there. That line is what we're going to see because the ear is behind. Now to create the little patches on her face, I'm just doing almost like a little bit of a heart shape. It's going to be fuller on the right side and just a partial on the left. It's going to end high. You won't see the full part of that area. Just going to have the little muzzle done basically the same. And then inside of those areas, that's where I'm going to do the eyes. I'm drawing just a simple little almond shape. The eye on be my right side, your left side. The biggest area, that's going to be more of a fuller eye. The one on the other side is going to be smaller, and perhaps the way you draw yours, you might only see partial of your eye. So now you can see Miss Rubi has the back side of her head and then the side of her cheek. So I'm going to start with the back. I'm going to start with the very back end. I'm going to connect that to the back part of her head, arch it out just a little bit, come back around, make a flat area for her foot, and then do her paw, and then come up with a hip. For the arm, I'm going to start right there underneath the cheek line, curve it out, and then I just do simple little fingers. I just wiggle back and forth to create the little fingers. I don't even know how many fingers squirrels have. And then bring that arm to the back. Then I build the stomach line, which is what you're going to see now, the little belly. I'm going to come out and then curve it back to that foot. Now this little arm on the other side, you're only going to just see a partial of it. You're actually going to see more of the hand. You start with more of that hand shape there that arches out and then creating the little fingers off of that. And to create the leg and the foot on this side, you're only going to see part of it as well. You're going to arch out, then come back, do your foot. Squirrels have kind of longer feet, so I'm kind of emphasizing that part of the foot a little bit more. Now this is where it's going to become more of a squirrel, is this tail. It's going to swoop up, come back around like an S shape. If I made a small little tail, it might look more like a bunny. So that's what's going to make it look like a squirrel. Now let's put her little fancy red glasses on. So I'm making little circles on that side, doing a little bridge across the nose. And then that next glasses actually goes past her face since she's turning sideways. The bow goes to the back of the head on the one side and then on the inside of the glasses on the other end. And that's how you can draw a Miss Rubi. Now I've put my painting or my drawing on some Canson XL watercolor paper. I traced it. I often do my own drawing on a copy paper type of paper, and then I will trace it onto my watercolor paper. That's the way I prefer to do it so I don't end up with a lot of extra line work on my watercolor paper, and I don't have to worry about damaging it by doing a lot of drawing, erasing, drawing, erasing. I did use a kneaded eraser to pick up some of the graphite of my painting just to lighten my pencil mark just a little bit. Those little gum erasers work perfect for picking up line work. It's not going to smear across your paper like a regular eraser will do. It will just pick up the graphite, and that helps lighten your pencil marks. Now to start this painting, I had already worked out a color sheet of the colors I wanted to do. It's always great to figure out kind of your color combination that you might want to work with before you start watercolor. There's not a lot of leeway to change things once you get started. So it's best to kind of figure out your colors before you start and then go ahead and paint your painting. You can always flex them by mixing colors and types of things like that, which I often do on the side. I will mix my colors, pick up a little bit of this, pick up a little bit of that, but it's just a great idea to have kind of a plan before you start. Now for Miss Rubi, she's going to have just a lighter tummy. She's going to have that little center part of her face a little lighter. So I've mixed a soft color of just a subtle little yellow, a little bit of raw umber together, watered it down a lot. We're talking about maybe more like a tea consistency or lighter. That's where I'm going to start the process with her little light areas. And I'm going to color it in. I start with a dry paper, pick up my watercolor, and then put it on those areas. Now she is already got one layer on, and I'm adding in a darker color on the top. This is going to be my shadow area. When you're doing watercolor, you are always building up the shadows. So you're starting with your lightest colors and then layering in your darkest ones. And that's how you're going to build dimension and contour to your paintings, is by starting light and then adding and building on for your darker layers. You always want to start with less pigmented color. That means more water added to it and less of your water color that's going to be on there. So you can see now I'm layering on that rusty color, more of the umber and the burnt sienna colors. I'm going to be laying that on the back. I'm okay if a little bit of that travels into that light area. It may not all be dry in the light area, and the unique property of watercolor, it's going to want to travel wherever your paper is wet. So if that tummy area is still a little bit wet, it's going to migrate that way, but that's okay because that's what we call a fuzzy soft edge of a line. It doesn't have to be exact. That's going to allow that fuzziness quality of a line instead of being so exact. If I want an exact line where I want it to stop and start my color to be a definite break in color, then I'm going to let that area dry completely before I were to add another color on. That's how you would get your crisp lines. But for this fuzzy, more because it's fur, there might be some of those little extra bits carrying into that area, and that's how I'm going to do it or create that painted look. You can notice here I'm adding just a little bit more subtle colors with watercolor because it is translucent. Even if you layer on the exact same color that you put on originally, you're going to see a slight difference. That's how you make those beautiful watercolor looks, that translucent look that we all love about watercolor, is by starting slow in the layering process. That's what watercolor is all about. You're going to be layering on one color, perhaps letting it dry all the way, and then adding on another one, or adding color while it's still wet, and then it's going to blend together, and I like to call it watercolor magic. It's going to create those soft watercolor blends on their own. Now this step of adding the light colors first and then adding the darker colors on, that's how I'm going to do this whole painting. So I'm going to be showing you some of the steps, but I'm also going to be bumping ahead so you're not sitting and watching all of the steps. Now this little painting actually took me probably about an hour and a half to paint. Maybe even 2 hours to paint, because I have to be patient, and it really does make a difference too if you allow your pigments and your paints to naturally dry. Now I know sometimes you got to get the painting done, so you just go ahead and use that hair dryer and dry it, and that's fine too. But if you have the time to let your paint actually sink down into your paper, you're going to get a different tone of your paint. Now watercolor always dries lighter when it dries lighter, so what the colors you're seeing now, when it's wet, are not going to look that same way when they dry. So that's why you're going to need to add those additional layers. There's some points in my painting when I'm doing it and I think, oh, that looks beautiful. I wish it would dry that way. But oftentimes it won't, and I'm going to have to add more layers. But in the end, it just does add that more rich quality by adding those little extra layers. I wanted to point out that I did add a little bit of a rosy glow to the squirrel's face. Since these are a storybook character, I often add just a little bit of that little rosy glow to their cheeks. And how I can do that is I wait until that cheek area is completely dry before I were to do it. I pick up some of that red color, maybe put a darker splotch of it, but not a lot. And then I will rinse my brush off with clear water, give it a squeeze, and then I will kind of lightly tickle that little rosy color out from where I had put it. And it does really create a really pretty little blushed cheek look. I'm also starting my strawberries. I'm starting with a bright red first, and then I'm picking up this darker shade of rusty tone color, and I'm choosing one side of my strawberries to add that color on, and that's where the dark area or the shadow area will be happening. And that's basically how I paint a lot of these areas. I start with the one color, the highlight, add the shadow area, but knowing that it's still going to dry lighter. So this is just the first layer. I think I end up putting at least maybe 4 colors on top of this strawberry. And each time I add a layer, it does add a little bit more dimension. I'm also painting around the green areas. I'm doing more of a negative painting area. So I'm not going to get some of that red, or try not to anyway, inside of the green tops of my strawberries. I'm painting around the little circles on the mushrooms. I use that darker rust color. That's the one I started with. And then now I'm laying in even a darker shade of the rust off to one side. But I'm trying to leave those little circles open if I can. Now, if I lose those areas, I can go back in at the end with a little bit of gouache and add those little spots right back in if I want to. I'm going to be adding some green little dash marks for seeds on top of my strawberry. I don't want to try to have to negative paint around little seeds, but I do still want a little touch of green, and the perfect art material to use for that is at the end with some gouache, because it's opaque. The color will look green, and it'll work perfect to add some small little details. This painting has a perfect start. It's going and building on itself. So let's jump ahead just a little bit further along in the painting and see where we are at. At this stage, I have a pretty good build up of color on my squirrel, and I'm going to be starting to work a little bit on the background. Now, I've chose to make this a collection, so I'm going to be using very much similar colors that I had used on Mr. Bramble Bristol. I'm going to be building the background the same way. Because I am making it a series and a collection, I will have these little items as a digital download on my Ko-fi shop, so if you might be interested in downloading them, having and bringing them to your house, either displaying them in a frame or using them for your crafts that if you would like to create with a watercolor image. I do have a small business licensing agreement on the images as well, so you can easily go ahead and take these little images and use them in your crafts as well too. Now, you did see where I was adding another color, so I'm going to be putting that on my color swatch of colors. So the next character I make, which I believe is going to be a little mouse, I'm going to be making the colors, or at least have some sort of reference to go by, as well as when I'm doing the next one in the next series. When creating these small little images that have a lot of different foliage backgrounds, the key to get that dimension is to have a variety of colors in the background, as far as different shades of green, and I'm going to be adding just a little bit of blue there, but also having different opacities. So the ones that are in the far background, or in the foreground, are going to be mostly just shades of that color. I didn't even draw them in. I only drew and have actual shapes are the foliage that is closer to me in the foreground. But anything in that background is going to be more of a mixture of the colors. So I'm going to water them down more, lay them in, and let the paint kind of just move in the background. So the ones I'm painting now are basically in the foreground, and then I'm going to be working in that background area next. You could do it in any order that you want. In Mr. Bramble Bristol, I think I actually started the background first and then moved my way forward. It doesn't really make a difference. I'm just going to be working on the leaves and the elements, the foliage that's closer, and then working to the background. At this stage of the painting, my little red squirrel has had plenty of time to dry, and I can see where I need to add even more layers. So I'm going to be starting the same process again of adding the little bit lighter and then adding more dark. So at this stage, I'm definitely adding more of the shadows. So you can see how much is really lightened since I added the first colors. And then now this layer of adding the darker one on, or the new paint, it looks like, oh, it's perfect and I should stop. But remember, it's going to still dry lighter. So I may end up adding another layer yet on the little squirrel. The background elements I pretty much kept the same as the Bramble Bristol painting that I worked on. So my mushrooms had those red tops, but then underneath they had a lighter tone underneath there. I'm going to do the same thing for these mushrooms and add those little bit of a lighter tone underneath, but there's still going to be a shadow underneath there because the cap of the mushroom is going to be casting a shadow. So this is the lightest shade underneath, but I'm going to be adding additional layers to the underneath areas as well. The leaves, the larger leaves that I've had painted before, I've had plenty of time to dry, so I don't have to worry about losing the edges on them. I had spoken earlier about a soft edge, about my colors or my line work blending in. But at this stage, I want my lines to stay more crisp. I want to see those leaf shapes that I had painted originally. So I'm going to let those dry all the way before I were to work on that more of a watercolor washy glaze look in the background. And they've had plenty of time to dry, so now I'm going to be starting that step. And I'm basically picking up the colors that I had used on the leaves in those different areas. I'm going to be using those same colors. I'm just watering them down a lot. And I'm putting on a little bit of the blue, a little bit of the green at the same time, and then just allowing that glazy kind of color look in the background. So the colors are wet, they're going to blend into each other, but those beginning leaves that I had painted originally should stay put. I'm not adding so much water on there, I'm just adding enough to get my colors to blend. At this stage, I'm going to be adding another layer of the darker colors as well on my strawberries and on my squirrel. It's still that the drying process and that background has dried, so I'm okay with adding those next layers to these elements. I'm not wanting any of that blue or green to blend into my strawberries or my squirrel. So I need to make sure that that background area is dry before I start this next layering of colors on those two areas. At this stage, I'm noticing that my little cheek area, blushed area, has almost disappeared to nothing. So I'm going to reapply my color, putting it on a little darker, then tapping it off on my paper towel off to the side, and then blending that color down just ever so gently. I want to be able to see that little soft pink quality, so I needed to add another layer. The little flower inside of this painting is more of a strawberry flower, so it's going to be white, but I wanted to create a yellow orangish center for the flower first, so I tapped in just a little bit of an orangish yellow and then a darker bit of orange, and I'm going to be adding just a tish bit of that darker blue to give it a little bit more dimension. Now this is the stage I'm adding a little bit more form into that washy area of my background, but I don't want exactly leaf shapes. I'm just looking for more of like almost a pattern or a tap of my brush to make it look like that's not the background, it's more of like a middle ground. So the ones in the very front are the foreground. This is creating that middle ground of seeing some leaf type of quality of shapes, but not actually drawn out in hard edges. So that's what I'm looking for in this stage. I'm still using some of the blue, some of the greens. I'm just watering them down. I'm going to be doing that same thing down at the bottom underneath her feet as well to give it a little bit more dimension. When adding this part of that middle ground, sometimes we're tempted to add quite a few, and I'm going to say less is more. So add just a few and then give yourself a little bit of time, let it dry, and see if you need to add some more. So I always kind of go for less is more in this step. At this stage, all my watercolor process is completely done, and now I'm bringing out the Micron pens, and I'm using the nib size as 01, so it's pretty small, and I'm going to be adding the details to my painting. I'm going to be scribbling in the nose, and I'm going to be trying to leave just a little bit of a bright highlight there for the nose. I always like it if I can scribble in an area and create the highlights because they're going to be slightly irregular and not just perfect little round circles. I like that idea of having the more irregular ones. Now with these eyes, I wanted to point out that after I did the line work around it, I really thought that I wanted to go back in and add some more brown watercolor to the center of that eye before I put the black. So I'm going to leave those more open, and then I'll come back and do the watercolor and then add a little bit more ink, the black area to it. Now with this little line work that I'm doing, it's very irregular. I go past my item that I actually painted. I'm creating a fuzzy look, so I'm just kind of going a little bit back and forth, adding some irregular line work here and there. It doesn't even have to be all the way outlined if you didn't want to. You can just add a few lines here and there, or I like adding lots of little different scribbly bits. So I'm going to be adding the pen work as I go. This is the stage I'm going to be adding the little brown areas to my eyes. And because I had used a Micron pen, the ink is going to be permanent once it's dry, so I don't have to worry about my ink smearing around. If your pen's not a permanent ink when it dries, once you put that extra additional water on there, that pen mark is going to move around. So you definitely want to be using something that is a permanent ink, and Micron pens are one of my favorites. I'm putting in just this little brown area. I'm trying to leave just a tiny bit of white that you can see. I'm going to let that brown dry, and then I'll be adding the Micron dark areas into my eyes. The next layers of detail I'm going to be adding is color pencil. I'm kind of a mixed media artist at heart, and I love adding color pencils to my watercolor. It's going to have a different look and a different line quality than what I can get with my watercolor. I'm using more colors that I have kind of sort of used already with my watercolors, but these are just going to be kind of little pops of color here and there. Again, I'm doing this line work similar to how I do my pen work. It's not perfect. It's more of a scribbly type of a look. Now all these steps are optional. You can definitely stop with just the watercolor step, but if you enjoy adding these extra details, find what works for you and create. And just, people say, well, how do you know when you're done? You're done when it makes you smile. At this stage, I'm going to be adding the bright highlights using a Jelly Roll pen, the 08 nib size, and the Sequoia brand of pen. I love the pen nib of this one. The white is a little bit more softer than, say, a Uniball pen nib would be. The Uniball pen is a little bit brighter ink, and sometimes I want that brighter ink, so I'll use that pen. But in this instance, I'm looking for more of a softer quality and just a small little bit of white, and I'm going to be using the Jelly Roll one to be able to create that look. Once I get the white on, I still have one more look. I got to add those glasses, and I'm going to be adding some brighter elements to those strawberries. And that I'm going to be doing with some gouache. With gouache, it dries very quickly, so I don't usually put out a lot on my plate. You'll often see me just dipping right into the tube and putting it there. I'm mixing a light shade of green to be able to add it onto the top of the strawberries. This is the perfect art medium to use because I can't get that green in at this stage using a watercolor. I need to create something that has a little bit more opaqueness and is going to stay right on the top, and gouache is going to work perfectly. Now with gouache, it is not a permanent medium, especially this kind. It's more of a water-based gouache, so it's not going to be permanent. It acts just like a watercolor would be. You'll need to go ahead and use a spray fixative on top of your watercolor at the end because watercolor is not permanent either. And you can either put it underneath glass if you're going to use it on top of a card. I'd recommend either putting like a spray varnish, a matte varnish on the top, or you can even wax your painting if you would like to do that as well. I'm going to be switching and using a mini brush because these glasses are so small. You might be asking, why am I using gouache? Well, because it's very matte and it doesn't have a shine difference. So when I scan my art into the computer, it's all the same shine. There is no glossiness to it. Gouache is very flat. Well, let's take the tape off and then take a look at what this cute little squirrel looks like sitting in my studio. And here they are. I just love creating some of these storybook characters. We have Miss Primrose Puddle, we have Mr. Bramble Bristol, and now we have Miss Rubi Redtail. Make sure you check out my Ko-fi shop if you might be interested in a digital download of any of these characters. If you enjoy doing whimsical style art or crafts, come on over and see what I'm doing. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment. It really does help YouTube push my videos out there. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.